Hey guys, what's going on? It's Chris here with Shughead Gaming, and I'm bringing you my review for Jurassic World Aftermath. Developed by Coatsink and published by Oculus Studios. Jurassic World Aftermath is currently only available for the Quest and Quest 2. The game retails for around $27, but of course, that depends on your region. This review will be based on the Quest 2 version. Trapped on Isla Nublar after the collapse of Jurassic World, you must escape a research facility. Sounds simple enough, but with shades of alien isolation, you are being stalked by 3 raptors who hated the sequel as much as you did. A simple setup to be sure, and I'm a little concerned there isn't much meat on the bone here. Stay with me while I tear this apart and see if Jurassic World Aftermath is the VR game we always wanted from the series. And as always guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button. It not only helps out my channel, but VR gaming as a whole. And if you'd like to see more VR content from me, please consider subscribing. And for video updates, make sure you hit that bell icon. Let's kick things off with a look at graphics. Designed specifically to run on the Quest and Quest 2 hardware, Jurassic World Aftermath wisely went with a comic book inspired art style, allowing for simpler textures and lighting. This cel-shaded approach is certain to get comparisons to both the Borderlands series and the more recent VR title Tarzan, or the criminally underrated VR title Lies Beneath. And while this approach certainly works for VR, and actually looks pretty nice on the lower powered hardware, it just never felt like the Jurassic Park or world I envisioned when stepping into VR. Lack of texture detail and an over-reliance on darkness are also issues here, but the real holdback here is the lack of level variation, leaving us with nothing but hallways, labs, elevators, and ventilation shafts to explore when we know there's an entire jungle filled with dinosaurs to explore. However, that is not this game, and Aftermath never tries to be, staying very focused on working within its limitations. And while it may not be the game I wanted it to be, it is, despite a few texture clipping issues, an extremely polished little VR title that thankfully looks and feels like a game that was actually ready for release. A welcome change of pace to be sure these days. Some jagged edges can be seen throughout, but this is never overly distracting, with the game's cel-shaded approach still looking clean and running smooth when in motion. An incoming Quest 2 boost to visuals is said to be on its way, which is certainly good news, as this is sure to get rid of much of the anti-aliasing issues I just mentioned. Cartoon approach or not, the various dinosaurs themselves, the raptors in particular, still feel legit when seeing them in VR, with what they lack in detail often being compensated for by some really decent animations, helping to sell the whole experience. All in all, what is here works and feels polished, and really comes down to a scope thing, being that this is not the huge Jurassic World experience that I think a lot of us wanted. Instead, we get a highly stylized and focused shot of a single idea, for better or for worse. Sound is up next.
Fine, I'll sit on the floor. Sam, look around. Let me see where you are. Operations. Good, you're safe in there.
Jurassic World Aftermath may not visually go for the whole movie experience, but sound-wise it feels like no expense was spared. Obviously, it still plays in the same small pond, but the score here feels huge, pulling from familiar themes, yet doing so in an original way. This quality symphonic score, while nice on its own, lends itself perfectly though to the excellent sound design heard throughout. World sounds are detailed and immersive, an aspect so crucial to a game primarily based around sneaking and atmosphere. And of course, the stars here in the sound mix, as they damn well should be, are the dinosaurs themselves, which sound, well, exactly like they do in the films. However, the biggest win here in Aftermath is the attention placed on the movements the 3 raptors make as they stomp around, attempting to ruin your day. For once you realize early on that stealth is absolutely key here in Aftermath, you will often be basing your actions entirely off where those raptors are, what direction they're headed in, and how far away. Thankfully, the sound design supports this and delivers it in a fairly effective 3D audio mix, making stealth feel a little more strategic as a result. And finally, closing out the sound mix here is the voice work, which, considering it is your only connection to the narrative, is thankfully handled with the same level of quality as everything else. Much of the game revolves around the communications you receive over the radio, giving you mission objectives, hints, and as previously mentioned, most of the game's narrative. Your main contact, the lead scientist, is handled very competently. Thankfully, as the almost constant chatter would have killed the game dead in its tracks if it didn't. Additionally, you can also look forward to some voice cameos by some Jurassic alumni from the films, which is a nice touch, adding in a touch of authenticity that is lacking from the visual side of things. All in all, a very solid sound mix here that really helps to elevate the whole experience. And that brings us to gameplay. They say bad things come in 3, and while I certainly wouldn't call any of these games bad by any means, Jurassic World Aftermath does round out the list of 3 big Quest exclusives this fall, all coming from big licensed properties and all suffering from the same early VR tropes of offering up cheap thrills and no substance. Of course, the other 2 games in question here are Star Wars Tales from the Galaxy's Edge and Warhammer 40k Battle Sister, all 3 of which are graphically impressive in their own rights, but outside of that, offered up basic VR arcade action at best, driven forward by stories that got by only on the existing lore they leaned on to move the narrative forward. And while I think it's painfully obvious that VR can make even mediocre games fun for a bit, these franchises deserve more. VR deserves more. As these paint-by-number Quest titles as of late, I fear do more to hurt the VR industry than they help, as they serve to only drive home the false assumptions that VR is simply a gimmick. And while I know I sound negative here, I am simply tired of highly anticipated titles crapped out onto the Quest store with little advanced promotion and even less effort into making games that would stand on their own if you removed them from virtual reality. And sadly, Jurassic World Aftermath wouldn't. Throughout your 3 to 4 hour campaign, you find yourself tasked with recovering the valuable information that honestly could have been a purple dildo for all it really matters here. And of course, you have to escape the research facility you are now trapped in. The core gameplay here involves you running around the facility, pushing buttons, turning knobs, and pulling levers. Some basic puzzles are thrown in here, but they, like much of the game's objectives, are rarely more than repetitive make-work tasks in which you'll be running back and forth over similar areas to complete. Thankfully though, the game plays really well, feeling very polished in both its movement and gameplay mechanics, making the overall feel of the game feel like it was made by a team that gets how to make a full movement VR title. This serves the game very well as it introduces you to its primary game hook in its stealth component. You see, while you are running around turning switches and pushing buttons, there are also 3 raptors on the loose. And in a gameplay loop very reminiscent of Alien Isolation, you must spend much of the game sneaking around, completely defenseless and paranoid of being discovered. However, unlike Alien Isolation, there really isn't any progression from this. You never learn to fight back, and this core mechanic never really mutates into anything other than what it starts out as, which is you armed with only a remote that can activate electronic devices to serve as distractions as you sneak through the various rooms. The raptors themselves certainly don't screw around though, and I died a lot. Unfortunately though, this isn't because they're smart, as they will look directly at you, but as long as you're in cover, you're fine. As such, this becomes a game of trial and error and memorizing raptor patterns. And while the Alien Isolation comparisons are sure to be made, Jurassic World Aftermath has much more in common with an older VR title called Intruders Hide and Seek. And that is what this is, but with raptors, and you know what, that's fine. And it's done to a rather effective degree here in Aftermath. It's just that that's all it does. So once you get through the first hour or so of the 3 to 4 hour campaign, the rest is just a case of rinse and repeat until you get to the cliffhanger ending, in which you learn we are only actually playing part 1 of a 2-part game. Here's hoping part 2 goes in a different direction, introducing new dinosaurs and gameplay mechanics, for once you're done this first installment, you will not want more. Jurassic Park Aftermath requires the use of 2 motion controllers and can be played with a minimum amount of room, either seated or standing. Tracking here is spot on, and the controls felt fantastic. Running, smooth turning, and sliding controls are all in place, but for those who suffer from VR sickness, you can also find click turning and blinder options to alleviate this. And finally, that brings us to fun factor in my final review. Jurassic World Aftermath looks, sounds, and plays well, and does manage to pull off a fun cat and mouse game that manages to be tense without treading too far into similar survival horror titles like the Outlast series. Unfortunately, it is a game that simply lacks much in the way of gameplay beyond its primary hook of sneaking around while not being eaten by raptors. And while the classic kitchen scene in the original Jurassic Park movie still stands as one of the greatest blockbuster moments in cinematic history, it simply isn't enough to sustain a complete game. The remainder of the game is sadly paint-by-numbers makework that involves a lot of backtracking, making much of my time spent here feeling padded for length. As you guys know, I hate numbered review scores and instead review games on a basis of buy it, burn it, or wait on it. Now, admittedly, I am actually not a fan of stealth games per se, as I find them often tedious and slow, and I despise games that give you no other recourse than to submit to the wait and move mechanics at hand. So, this is definitely not my type of game. That being said, I pride myself on reviewing games based on what they are, not what I want them to be, as they may obviously appeal to those who prefer one type of genre over another. Well, as a Jurassic Park fan, I really wanted to like this game when it was first revealed. Unfortunately, my suspicions were confirmed, and there just isn't much here to keep avid gamers interested, as it simply isn't deep enough, scary enough, or Jurassic Park enough to likely keep your interest past the first hour. And this sucks, because the foundation is here for a good VR game that would have supported a fully realized Jurassic World game just nicely for this hardware. That being said, this could still be worth picking up on a decent sale, as it does make for some quick pick up and play VR to show off your Quest to newcomers, as despite its shortcomings, it is a very polished experience that makes a good first impression. As always guys, I'll catch you on my next video.